بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. نويت التعلم والتعليم وتذكر والتذكير ونفي إفادة استفادة وحتى تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى هدى ودلالة على خير اضطراب وجلال موضوعات القلب بثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you all for joining us for another Living Islam, and inshallah we pray that you are all well. Just as a quick note on the Living Islam and how we usually do things, is that I always like to start out by saying that this is not a lecture, so I have nothing prepared whatsoever. This is an open discussion. We come together once a month and we just let the forum take its shape, its form. And so this is meant to be a means for people to be able to discuss and talk about those things that may be on their minds that they may possibly otherwise feel that they don't get a chance to talk about or to have discussions around. And so there's nothing that I have prepared. And so essentially the format of the night, or should I say the way the night will go, will be based upon the participation that we have. So I'm going to start to turn it over to you all, and you can guide me into how we should proceed for tonight, inshallah. So it looks like we have something. Someone is asking in relation to a YouTube short. I'm sure I probably haven't seen it.
I just don't enjoy anything anymore. I truly don't. Like when the Prophet ﷺ saw Israfil alayhi salam, and he had his lips puckered, right, ready to blow. And with that blow, death comes to everyone. The words of the Prophet ﷺ were, Kayfa an'um. How can I have an appetite for this world? How can I find happiness anymore after I've seen Israfil staring at the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, waiting for the command to blow? Kayfa an'um. And over and over and over again, like sometimes I'm sitting with myself and I go, Kayfa an'um. I just don't enjoy anything anymore. I truly don't. Like I don't enjoy anything anymore. But I have to almost like lean into, all right, my family has rights upon me. I still have to smile at this person. I still have to put on a face to do this. But Allah will ask me about what's in here, and Allah will ask me about my thoughts, and Allah will ask me about my actions. And we have to be ready, just like on a personal level, where we simulate what it will be like to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment. I just don't enjoy anything anymore. I truly don't. Like when the Prophet ﷺ saw Israfil alayhi.
So I don't know if everyone else have seen that short from Imam Musliman. Hafidhullah. I don't necessarily like to try to comment on things that are like specific to any individuals or the like. But I mean, this is something where, for example, the Prophet Muhammad SAW, he's mentioned to us the reality of things in relation to how we should more or less see the world. That, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned in one hadith, one narration, that if you knew what I knew, that you would weep, you would laugh little and you would weep much. I mean, so there definitely are things where it can bring us to a point where we don't necessarily have a true enjoyment of the dunya. And it's not to necessarily say that this is a good or a bad thing per se, because the Prophet ﷺ, he also at the same time, he said in another narration that there have been three things that have been made beloved to me in this world, and he mentioned his famous statement of women, perfumes, and the coolness of his eye being in the prayer. So, but there is a reality that the more a person starts to reflect upon death, and the more that a person starts to reflect upon the reality of this hayatul dunya, of this worldly life, is that the less and less they're going to find true enjoyment in worldly things. So I haven't had a conversation with the Imam Umar Suleiman, nor am I going to try to say what he truly meant by it and so on and so forth. But, just in general aspects, is that there can be a situation where we come to a point of really seeing the dunya for what it's worth. And the reality of the dunya is that it's a temporal abode, that when you understand that, you can't put your heart into it. And what I mean by that is that, for example, if I were to give you $1 million in cash and say, like, here, look, here's $1 million, but you can only hold it for 10 seconds, are you going to put your heart into it? Or, like, would you even think that you're really going to enjoy it? Someone just says you can hold $1 million for 10 seconds. I mean, in our times today, you might try to flash a quick selfie or something like that to make it seem like you're rich or whatever the case may be. But, like, the average sane person, they're not going to put their heart into it. And so that is a similitude of this dunya, is that even though, yes, we live for longer than 10 seconds, but when you compare the akhirah to this dunya, how much time is there really? So, there is this is why the arifin, the knowers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their whole basis is that they find their pleasure in the dhikr, in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is something that is, the ultimate reality, where, as one of my teachers would say, that the true reality is you, Allah, in your grave. And so when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the true reality. And so if we connect our hearts to Allah, then, we'll never, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun," that there shall be no fear upon them, nor shall they be grieved or be grieved for. But, not all of us will necessarily reach to that level. But, Allahu A'lam, I don't want to make any claims in regards to it. And of course, yes, seeing the atrocities that happen in the world and so on and so forth, it could just emphasize the aspect of the temporal and the fleeting nature of this world. How's everyone else doing? Oh, and just a heads up, in about 20 minutes, I'm gonna have to take a break from Maghrib. So, just as a heads up. Muslim brothers and sisters being racist to other Muslims. Yeah, I mean, the nature of human beings is that people will be people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions that we are the best of ummahs, that, kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas, that you are the best of nations brought forth for mankind. However, that doesn't mean that we're going to be free of different types of faults and blameworthy characteristics. And so, even during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the companions were still trying to overcome some aspects of racism and so on and so forth. So, for example, you have the famous story of one of the companions who was trying to speak ill towards Bilal bin Rabah, and he referred to him as Ibn Sauda, but he was trying to say it in a negative connotation, that you son of a black woman. And so the Prophet Muhammad he corrected this mentality, and the Prophet he tried to do away with this. One of the famous statements in his farewell Hajj is the aspect that someone who is white is not better than someone who is black, just as someone who is black, someone who is white and Arab is not better than a non-Arab, except in the aspect of taqwa. However, just as we have other injunctions from the Prophet Muhammad and from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't mean that Muslims will always adhere to it. And so what we try to do is that we try to overlook the faults of others. And so we thank Allah if He has kept us away from having those faults, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cover up the faults that we may have, that other people may be exposed to, that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps our faults away from people and keeps us from harming others. And if we see a fault in someone else and it's a fault that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has protected us from, then we should make dua and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, and make sure that we strive our best to not engage in it ourselves. And by thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that inshallah this is a way of making that a reality, because if you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then He will increase you in the blessings that He's given you. And protecting a person from ma'asi, or keeping a person away from different types of ma'asi, that is one of the best blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give to a person. Wallahu a'lam. What could be said about the waters of creation? Are you talking about the aspect of like the sexual fluid, that in terms of waters of creation? I just want to make sure I understand the question, because it could be that I don't know. So,
I'm sorry, I'm using a headset. I'm using a headset that I can't really talk. You probably can't hear me.
no, I can
But I just want to find out more about it here.
So, but I'm just trying to clarify. Are you talking about like sexual fluid in terms of the waters of creation?
No, 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 no. I think it was like one of the origins or beginning of creation, I believe. That there was this like I don't think it was like regular water. It was like some kind of water by which creation came about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find out more about it.
Yeah.
Because this
Um,
seems to be a thing that also runs in other religions as well. That that there's some kind of water by which creation came about. So this
um,
interests me.
I'm not sure myself, so I'm gonna have to take the fatwa of Imam Malik, la adri. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran that, He created everything that is living from water. But I have not come across the aspect of any type of special water, and that could just be from my ignorance. But if anyone else may know, they can mention what they may know of it. But I don't know anything
Okay.
enough to comment on it. But yeah, I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does mention that He created everything living from H2O, from water. If a young man wants to date a Muslim woman, he comes from a Muslim family, but he does not practice Islam himself, what can I tell this young man? If a young man wants to date a Muslim woman, he comes from a Muslim family, but he does not practice Islam. So I'm assuming he's not looking for marriage. He just wants to possibly have a Muslim girlfriend. Is that the case? Maybe. I mean, it would be hard to say because you have to look at the different variables in the situation. So, I mean, I could just give like possible hypotheticals per se. But I mean, first and foremost, the as far as the aspect of dating is concerned, if you're dating your wife, then that's perfectly fine. But if that's not the case, then it's not fine. And so, if this young man is serious in terms of his wanting to have a relationship with this young woman, then he should be told that from an Islamic perspective, you know we are not celibate. However, our relationships are based upon marriage. And so if this young lady is of interest to him, then he should be thinking to himself if he's willing to take on the responsibility of marriage. But even before that, is that if this young lady is a Muslim and inshallah a practicing Muslim, then he would want to make sure that his relationship with Allah is correct before trying to engage in a relationship with someone else. But again, I would have like there's so many variables with it, so it would just be a thing of kind of like what is what is the real situation that's happening. What is this individual's understanding of the religion? What is his level of practice? If we're saying that he's not practicing, like, is there any practice at all? Is it occasional? There's so many variables, and so this is one of the things that you learn more when you start doing things in relation to counseling and these type of things, in the sense that a lot of situations are very specific, meaning that it's it's not necessarily truly beneficial to try to give like a general answer, particularly when a person is not aware of some of the pertinent details that, pertaining to it. And if you look at the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see this. Like, one of the reasons why people will come across a hadith where they feel that these are contradictory, where it's like in one situation it seems the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying yes to something, and in another situation it seems like he's saying to no and to the same exact thing, and so on and so forth. And one of the major reasons why this happens is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he dealt with the Sahaba on a case-by-case basis. It was contextual. So yes, in some situations, a person may have come to him and he has said yes to them in relation to a particular matter. And then another time, a companion may have come to him with the same matter, and the Prophet may have said no, because he was looking at it not from like a general, okay, this is the default situation in this particular case, but rather what is the case of this individual. So like a very basic matter that is more well known is when the Prophet ﷺ was asked about kissing one's spouse during Ramadan, and two separate occasions. In one occasion he told a man yes, and then another occasion he told a man no. And so the ulama, they explain that the situation that occurred is that the man that he said yes to was an older man who had been married for some time, and so there wasn't any fear that by kissing his spouse that it would lead to anything further. Whereas the man who came to him that he said no to, this was a young man who was recently married, and so the Prophet ﷺ told him no because there was a fear that it would lead to something more than just a kiss. And so it's similar to many different situations, is that in order to really have a sincere, genuine response, you really oftentimes have to look at individual circumstances. It's not something where it's just going to be, okay, in every circumstance, this is what it's going to be. So, that's why I was saying that it would just depend on who this young man is, what his ultimate intentions are, what his understanding of the religion is, and his experience with the religion, and so on and so forth. Because my greater concern is not necessarily the aspect of him trying to date a Muslim woman. My greater concern is what is his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because once we can work on that, then inshallah ta'ala the whole dating a Muslim woman thing will be settled. But the aspect of him wanting to date a Muslim woman, in particular if we're talking about the Western haram aspect of dating, then that means that there's something going on here with his relationship with Allah. And so trying to figure out what is the best way of helping him in that, then that would be my greater concern. Because the aspect of trying to date a young woman, you could more or less say that that's just kind of like a symptom of a greater issue. Wallahu a'lam. Which seafood is forbidden? There's an ikhtilaf on that question. So it depends on which school of law you're looking at, and even within the different schools of law, they differ. Like if you wanted to ask me, like, if you wanted to like be overly precautious in terms of seafood, then anything that would not be identified as a fish, avoid it. And also that would include shrimp. But that's not a hard fast rule, because for example in the Shafi school of law they would say that anything that only lives in the water is permissible to eat. So that would include crabs that only live in the water, lobsters that only live in the water, shrimp, squid, anything that only lives in the water, then in the Shafi school, they would more or less consider that to be permissible to eat. However, in the Hanafi school, for example, they would say that it's only those things that would be recognized as being a fish during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So this is why things like crabs or lobsters or these type of things would not be considered to be permissible according to the Hanafi school. And with shrimp, there's the ikhtilaf even within the Hanafi school. So some of the Hanafi scholars will say that it is actually permissible to eat shrimp. Some will say no. That's why I said it was one of those things where it's the ikhtilaf. So if you just wanted to be extremely precautious, like, take the position that no one disagrees about, then only eat that which would be actually recognized as being fish. And that would not include shrimp. But otherwise, it's going to go based upon the different schools of law. So it just depends. Well, mercury in the fish, that's a whole nother aspect. That just goes into, health and the like. So, if you want to be more healthy, then yeah, you don't want to eat fish that are higher up on the food chain within the sea, because they would have more mercury in them. And then also certain fish are more prone to have mercury. So for example, like tuna is more prone to have mercury, and so on and so forth. So yeah, those would just be things you would consider from a health perspective. And so, that's how you look at that. What about fish that can be, everyone's asking about seafood. What about fish that can be potentially poisonous if it's not prepared properly, like fugu, puffer fish? Again, from the standpoint of the Shafi school, as long as it only lives in the water, then it's going to be considered to be something permissible, and you would just make sure that you prepared it so that it wouldn't harm you. But in the Hanafi school, it would just depend. If a puffer fish, if it's actually known to be a fish, and then, like, if you're looking at the default aspect of it, then it could possibly be considered to be permissible even in the Hanafi school as well, if it would be recognized as being a fish in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So, but if it's known that it's likely to cause you harm, if you were to eat it, then it can possibly considered to be, for example, makruh. So like it may not reach the level of being absolutely haram, but it might be makruh if there's a significant chance of it harming you. So it would just depend. I haven't looked into pufferfish, so I don't know like what is the likelihood of it poisoning you. But if it's a significant likelihood, then you could say that it might even reach the level of being makruh, or in the case of like in the Hanafi school, they might say makruh tahrimi, which is basically going to be sinful. But again, it would just it would just all depend on. But so like what I mentioned was just kind of like the general concepts. So in the Hanafi school, they say that it has to be something that would be actually recognized as being a fish. In the Shafi school, it's just anything that only lives in the water, then that would be considered to be what's permissible. And all of it is coming from the general hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the dead of the sea has been made permissible for his community. And so the ulama, they just interpret it in different ways. The Hanafi school, the Shafi school kind of took it a more blanket way. And the Hanafi school, they put more limitations on it. So I'm assuming everyone was hearing like my phone and other stuff going off in terms of Maghrib. So as I mentioned before, around this time, I'm going to be taking a break to pray Maghrib, inshallah ta'ala. So Maghrib on my phone came in at 7:02. I usually always give it like 3 minutes. So now it's 7:05. So inshallah, I will be stopping right now so that those of us on the East Coast, we can break for Maghrib. And then we'll come back after that, inshallah ta'ala. So just a Maghrib break, inshallah. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Alhamdulillah. Okay, inshallah. Hopefully those who are on the East Coast had a chance to pray their salat, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept them and forgive us of our shortcomings. Seems like while we were away, someone put in the chat, for the Shafi school, when we make mistaken prayer, is it correct that we make 2 additional prostrations and salam out after after the last rak'ah? So that's the general description of what's referred to in Arabic as the sajda sahwi. However, it would only be done in those mistakes that necessitate it. So in the Shafi school, for the most part, is going to be the non-performance of what is considered to be a sunnah mu'akkada, and for the most part there are going to be only a few instances that's going to occur. So that's going to be, for example, if a person misses the first tashahhud, so if a person does not sit for the first tashahhud, or if they do not do the dua qanut in salat al-fajr, if they are praying as the imam. So if you're praying behind an imam, and if the imam does not do the dua qanut, then it doesn't, then there's no sujood sahw that you would do on your own, for example. You don't do a sujood sahw behind the imam when you're praying the full prayer behind him. But if one is praying on their own or as the imam themselves, and they did not do the dua qanut in the fajr prayer, then technically speaking it will require a sujood sahw. Also, if a person were to leave out the salams on the Prophet Muhammad in the first tashahhud, so meaning a prayer that has more than 2 rak'ahs, so basically every fard prayer besides Fajr, that in that first tashahhud, before you stand back up to complete the prayer, if you were to not say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, then that would also require sujood sahw, or it would be deficient without the sujood sahw. And so those are the main sunnahs, the emphasized sunnahs, that if you were to miss them would require sujood sahw. And then also if you were to add something to the prayer, if you were to add something accidentally, if you intentionally add something to the prayer that's not from the prayer, or like for example a person says, instead of praying 4 rak'ahs I want to pray 5 rak'ahs, and they intentionally do that, then that actually breaks the prayer in of itself. But if you accidentally add something, or for example if a person forgets how many rak'ahs they've prayed, and so they go with the lesser of the 2 numbers, so if the person's like, I don't know if this is my 3rd or my 4th rak'ah, and then so in the default position in the Shafi school is that if you're debating between 2 numbers, is this my 3rd or my 4th, you go with the lower number, and then you do a sujood sahw at the end because of the possibility of it being wrong. So in those situations as well, you would do a sujood sahw. Other mistakes that a person may make in the prayer, generally speaking, would not require sujood sahw. But yes, the way that you would do it is that you would go all the way up until the end of the prayer, right before the taslim, and then you would do 2 prostrations, and then you would do the taslim. So I mentioned, remember when we were talking about an Islamic swimming pool for us, especially our children, there's more people on that webinar that day. You mentioned that would be a good business to start. Well, I Googled swimming pools that allow same-sex to swim or something to that effect. I was shocked and happy in what I had found. MashaAllah. Yeah, I mean, because technically speaking, not even it's not just Muslims who would have segregation and something like a pool, but even like the Orthodox Jewish community as well, they would have segregation in regards to swimming and so on and so forth. So uh, I'm sure there are some places. It just depends on where they're at, whether it's going to be close to you or not. Is there something that is said in the additional two prostrations while we're prostrated for such a tasahu? So it's a sajda sahu. So there's not anything extra. You would just say the supplication Subhan Rabbil A'la, similar to when you do the sujood any other time. But there's nothing extra. And even if you didn't say anything at all, as long as you were there for at least the moment to say Subhanallah once, then that will fulfill the obligation in of itself. Question received: crippling fear of Allah. I don't know if it's a question, but khawf, fear, is something that the believer is required to have, and ultimately, what we want to come to is the station where the only thing that we do fear is Allah. However, that fear shouldn't be, as it's kind of mentioned here, necessarily crippling, because there's the aspect as well that we have of hope, and that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu he's informed us is that we should never despair, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself in the Quran has informed us that we should never despair in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the same time that we should never think ourselves safe from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the believer is the one who tries to stay in a balance where they fear being taken into account by Allah, but at the same time they are hopeful in the mercy of Allah. And the believer should also take heart that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that His mercy supersedes His wrath. And so based upon all of these different factors is that a believer, yes, they should have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possibly taking into account, but also couple that with the raja, the hope and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because His mercy is vast. And so as long as we don't come to Him associating partners, He's informed us that He is willing to forgive all of our other sins. And so, make that our focus, making our worship sincerely for the sake of Allah, and inshallah have a good opinion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be merciful with us, inshallah, and use that fear to keep you away from those things that will be displeasing or disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just use that fear to be a reminder, like, okay, let me not engage in those things that might be displeasing or disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the aspect of fear is something that we are supposed to have, but at the same time we're also supposed to have hope in conjunction with that fear. Wallahu a'lam. Sister Amna in Queens made arrangement with the boys club there for all women and girls to swim there for 1 hour on Saturdays, men and boys to swim there on Sundays. It's only in the morning, 7 a.m. before activities start there. It's not long, but it's a start. The sister had made these arrangements with the boys club. Her name is Amna. She started this because her 9-year-old died, and her daughter took off her life jacket and gave it to another child who was drowning, mashallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise her in darajat and give her sabr al-jameel, a beautiful, patient, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on the child and make the child a means of her parents entering to paradise. Ameen. So yeah, I mean, this is just kind of like another indication of sometimes it could be just as easy as asking or seeking out something that we want, and we might be surprised how easy it might be offered. In particular because, again, other communities will sometimes be looking for those same accommodations. Yeah, I wish the pool in my complex had hours for men and women. MashaAllah. أنت خير الدين والدنيا والآخرة. Sorry about that. Uh, Seems like my computer has been overworked today, so I just kind of gave up on me, so to speak. Someone mentioned, as a veteran, I grapple with PTSD. I've read this several times in the Quran and the Prophet, so I said I'm dealing with anxiety and worry. Are there any dual or Islamic books you could recommend that address this? Actually, there is a book, Sheikh Muhammad Ramadan Abulti. He has a book on depression and anxiety. So I could recommend that book, inshallah ta'ala. Um, I forget the exact title of the book, but within the title is Depression and Anxiety. It's by Sheikh Muhammad Ramadan Abulti, rahimahullah ta'ala. Um, but I can recommend that book um, um, for anyone that might be dealing with anxieties and worries. Um, yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it easy. There are different um, shukran. So that's the link was just put in the chat. You're probably not going to be able to get it from Word Books because they're Malaysian based, and so they don't. I don't unless they've recently started shipping to America. I know previously they weren't, but um, if they are, that's one place to get it. But if you just look up that book, it's available on Amazon and other places as well. I'm actually trying to see if I can get back in on. Sorry, I'm trying to see what's going on here. The Zoom on my computer doesn't seem to be working. Of course, someone has it as a free PDF online. think my laptop has had enough for the day. I've actually been using it pretty much all day today. So try to see if I can. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, that's a book that I can recommend, inshallah ta'ala. And sorry, I know I'm looking distracted because, like I said, I'm trying to see if I can get back on Zoom via my laptop because it's just a little bit more convenient. Um, but my computer is like fighting against me. I think it's trying to tell me that uh, it's had enough for the day. Yeah, it's unfortunately many veterans don't get the help and assistance that they need, given the the many different things that they go through. Um, PTSD being one of the more common situations, and so may Allah make it easy and give give all of you uh, the assistance that is needed. Oh, boy. Okay. Okay, got it now. Yeah, definitely. PTSD is not limited to being a veteran. It's just you see many veterans who do struggle with it. But yeah, PTSD is not limited to any experience in life per se. Many people deal with PTSD. Can a person perform Umrah even if he or she has debt, or should that person finish off the debt and then go to Umrah? Yeah, that question actually comes up a good bit, and the answer to the question is that if it was based upon being free of debt in terms of a person's ability to go to Umrah, pretty much none of us would be going to Umrah. I mean, not to say none of us, but a large percentage of individuals would not be going to Umrah. So no, a person does not have to could be completely free of debt in order to go on Umrah. So the basic aspect is that you are able to cover your immediate expenses, particularly that of your dependents. But especially like long-term debts that most people have, and so on and so forth, you don't have to worry about paying having those paid off. And the same thing goes for Hajj. You don't. It's not a requirement that. I mean, now if you can have your debts in order, that's great, but it's not a condition because, again, most people have some type of debt that they have, even if it's going to be like your mortgage or something like that. So what you need to have done is basically the duration that you'll be away, whatever is needed for your dependents, that be covered. But to be completely debt free, it's great if you can get to that point, but that's not a precondition of Hajj or Umrah. But again, I would suggest as best as you can to be debt free. Yeah, I mean, Celebrate Mercy does offer free trips for Hajj times, but usually you have to be a significant donor to be eligible, or be entered into like a raffle or something like that. But yeah, if you can have someone or an organization that can help you to go on Hajj, then or Hajj or Umrah, then alhamdulillah, that's great. If you are paying interest on the debt, should you get out of interest first and then go to Umrah? I mean, interest is something that it's a serious matter in Islam. So if a person is in a state where they are paying off interest loans or interest debt, then you want to get out of that debt as quickly as possible. And so yeah, you want to get out of that as soon as possible, because interest is it's one of the major sins, and unfortunately it's so easy to get caught up in it in our times today. And so the quicker that a person can free themselves of it, the better. Booking a house for parents, I mean, I would say, yeah, if you can contact someone that you know that does Hajj trips, that's not really my my area of expertise per se. And also the Saudi government, post-COVID, they've changed up how they're doing Hajj for people in America. and I actually don't even know what it fully is like right now. But if you're just talking about the financial aspect of it, then just trying to save up, and so that hopefully they can go sooner rather than later, because the older that you get, the more difficult it becomes, because Hajj is a very physically demanding trip. And like I usually tell people is that oftentimes when you go on Hajj, you're either going to come back sick or injured or both. And so the younger you can go, the better, because you're going to need time to recover. And the older that you get, the longer it takes to recover. And then also it's just going to be more difficult to have to deal with the physical aspects of Hajj, because there's a lot of walking, there's a lot of uncomfortable situations that you'll find yourself in. So when you're older, it's just not as easy. وإياكم وإياكم. Yeah, they I know the Saudi government before had a website up for people, because they're like, I don't know if this is still how they're doing it because I haven't looked into it in a while. But like it was basically like a lottery type of situation. But then some people were telling me that it still is like based upon that. But but it's kind of like you're more or less going to get accepted anyway. And then once you're accepted, then you have like a limited amount of time to try to select the Hajj group that you might want to go with. And basically you like have to know who the Hajj leader of the group is and how many people that particular group is going to be able to accommodate. And so it's like a whole process that they have in place online. So I'm not all that familiar with it. Like the last time I went, the only time I have went to Hajj was in 2019, and so this is way before any of these new updates and type of things. And technically speaking, I wasn't even allowed to go until last year. I think last year, either last year or this year, was the first year that I would have been eligible to go for Hajj again. So I just haven't really looked into it. As I've tell people, my intention is to only go on Hajj one more time, and that's just to take my wife, and that'll be about it. Umrah is something different, inshallah. I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens the door for me to be able to make Umrah a number of times. But in terms of the actual Hajj, I only intend to go one more time with my wife, and that's it, inshallah. Ameen, ameen. Yeah, the Prophet Muhammad said himself, he only actually went on Hajj once in his life. So his Hajjatul Wada was his only Hajj. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are different groups and people who regularly are able to go on Hajj. So Allah has not necessarily made that the case for me. Make dua, and we are trying to see if we'll be able to take some of the university students for Umrah. So inshallah ta'ala, that can be a means of me being able to go, but that's still in the works. But that is an intent to try to see if we can take some of the university students here in Pennsylvania for Umrah as a regular. Yeah, that's the intent, to do basically a university group trip to Umrah to Mecca, Medina. So is still in this beginning phases in terms of trying to make it a reality. But inshallah, I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to be able to facilitate it. Because if I can be able to go for Umrah and it be paid for, alhamdulillah. So what else is going on in the world? Or maybe I shouldn't ask that question. There's a lot going on in the world. Is playing lotto haram? Yes. So essentially, you can sum it up within the following aspect. Anytime that you pay for something with the aspect of getting something in return solely based upon luck, that is going to be considered to be haram. So in Islam, just like in economics, we say that there's only two things that you can possibly buy, which is goods or services. So if you spend money and you're not getting a good, nor you're getting a service, then that's an indication that it's not going to be considered to be a valid Islamic transaction.
She made the scene and she's not dressed. I'm just going to close this.
It's an indication that it would be an invalid transaction. In particular, when you're talking about paying for something and hoping by way of luck that you'll get something out of it. So that includes the lotto or buying raffle tickets or playing bingo if you pay money for it and so on and so forth. So anything that we pay with the hopes of gaining something in return solely based upon luck, then that will be considered to be haram. The reason why I put it that way is because people I've mentioned it before, and people will say, well, investing is based upon luck, and investing is not solely based upon luck. You actually put in an effort to try to make a profit and try to make the company, the organization profitable. What we're talking about here is where there is no aspect of putting in any type of work. It's just purely based upon luck. If you really want to raise funds, then as one of my teachers will say, is that if there's ever a campaign that you're wanting to be successful, then you should market it in the middle of the night on the prayer rug. Meaning get up in the middle of the night and pray tahajjud and ask your Lord for it. That's the best way to get whatever it is that you're looking for. happened to the I'm assuming you're asking that you heard my sons in the background. Well, actually, it's actually just the opposite. The baby actually just woke up, and my son, I had to wake him up for Maghrib. So I believe they just went downstairs though. So that's why it's now quiet. And also my son came and closed the door. But no, the actual baby, he just woke up. And more than likely he's going to be hungry, so he's probably eating or getting ready to eat as we speak. What are the requirements that would allow one to stand in prayer, for example? You mean sit in prayer? You mean what? No stand if one feels they can't bend. Oh, so you're saying, like, for example, if you can't go into ruku or sujood. Okay, so generally speaking, according to the Shafi method, for example, is that all of the physical movements of the prayer are a requirement. However, if a person is in a situation where they have some type of physical ailment that a normative person would consider to be unbearable. So meaning, like, the basis of it would be, it's like if you ask 3 regular average people if this is something that is bearable or not, what would their response be? So that if a person is in a situation where an average person would say that this is an unbearable hardship, then in those type of situations, then a person can take a dispensation in one of the physical aspects of the prayer that they're not able to do. But it would be limited to those things that they're not able to do. So for example, if a person is not able to go into sujood, but they can still go into ruku, then they would do the ruku, but they just would not go into sujood, and so on and so forth. So it's going to actually come down to more of a subjective aspect, but the ulama, they say that you should be mindful of coming to a decision with a level of taqwa. That if it's just like merely, if it's like just more or less an inconvenience, but it's not a true hardship, then you would still try to perform the prayer in its full form. But if it truly is a hardship, then you pray the prayer in the best of your capability. So, essentially what the ulama mentioned is that if a person is not capable of standing, then they would sit down. If they're not capable of standing, then they would lie down. If they're not able to lie down, then they can, in the Shafi school anyway, they can actually pray with head movements. And even if they can't pray with head movements, then they can pray with their eyes, blinking their eyes for the different movements of the prayer. But again, it would depend on the severity of the condition. And so the general aspect is that either if you have a trustworthy doctor who will tell you that by doing the different motions of the prayer that you are going to cause yourself harm, whether it's going to increase the injury, or it's going to prolong the healing from the injury, or it's going to, and I mean, I don't really know how it would necessarily be the case, but I'm just giving you the different scenarios. If it's going to cause harm to life or limb, then in that case, it would be permissible to take a dispensation in terms of physical actions, or if it is from personal experience, that you just know that from in this injury that you may have, or this physical hardship that you may have, that it's just going to be too difficult upon you. And that difficulty is based upon, in general, what an average person would consider to be, a hardship. And so that's why we say it's subjective. And the ulama just say, you want to have taqwa with it. So if an injury would be exacerbated, for example, you literally said what I just wrote, like, yeah. And so again, it's going to be subjective. So it's like, I get, like, because even like if you go to a medical doctor, medical doctors have this aspect of like, of pain, in the sense that, some pains, it's easy to kind of see where it's coming from. Like, so for example, if a person has a cut on them, then it's easy to see, okay, yeah, that is where the pain is coming from. But then when you get into the level of how much pain is there, then, it's just subjective. Because I can't tell you what you feel, essentially. You know what you feel, no one else can. So again, this is why the ulama just say that, to have taqwa with it. If it's just a minor inconvenience, or, somewhat inconvenient, then you might, make that sacrifice. But if it's truly something that is, truly causing you pain or issues, then you have that dispensation of not necessarily doing the full physical action of the prayer. Wallahu a'lam. I heard briefly today about nafs. Can you explain? That is a very broad concept. Was there a context in which you were hearing it? And that can kind of like narrow it down in terms of what would be explained. Because nafs is just, it's a very general term. And so if there's a context behind it, then it makes it a little bit easier. And actually, it reminds me of a hadith that I actually heard earlier today from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that a man came and asked the Prophet ﷺ something, and the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, like, your question was short, but the answer to it is, very, very vast. And I'm paraphrasing the hadith, but, basically saying, like, the question is short, but what is being asked about is, very broad. So without having any context, the aspect of the nafs, it has different connotations. The most common aspect that you'll hear in relation to the nafs is the lower desires. And so oftentimes when people are talking about the nafs, they're talking about the lower desires of the individual. Sometimes it'll be translated as the soul, or the self. And so the basic concept, if you're looking at it from that perspective, is it's that aspect of the human being that inclines towards different aspects of this world. And so in this regard, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran, in particular, specifically, He mentions 3 different types of nafs. The first nafs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the first nafs, in terms of like the order of, and actually it also goes in the order of the Quran as well. The first nafs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about is in Surah Yusuf, where he talks about the nafs that amaratu bisu, that he talks about the nafs that commands to evil. And so this is considered to be like the base level of the nafs, of the lower self, or the desirous self. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about the aspect of the nafs, that it commands towards evil. So again, this is the aspect of the desires within a person, that commands towards those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated as not being permissible for a person. And so in relation to that, all of us have those inclinations. It's just that for some of us, those inclinations can be stronger or weaker, depending on our situations. But this is like at the base level, that, you know, this is kind of like the animalistic nature that we have as human beings, where we have certain desires, you know, even from the standpoint of those things that can be permissible as long as we do them in certain ways. So for example, procreation is only haram if it's done outside of the institution of marriage. So our nafs, it has the desires for that intimacy with another human being. However, it has to be done in a way legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it will be the nafs that is inclining towards it, and we have to make sure that we keep it, meaning the nafs, in control, such that we don't allow for ourselves to engage in a manner, in a situation that is haram. The second nafs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions is in Surah Al-Qiyamah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he swears by it, where he mentions the nafs al-lawwama. And so this is the self-reproaching nafs. So this is the nafs, still we're talking about the lower desire of the self, or the self that is a part of our egos. That's another way that it's mentioned. This is when a person starts to understand about about these desires that are counter to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, and a person starts to reproach themselves. You know, they start to blame themselves. They start to try to work on themselves. And so this is called the nafs al-lawwama, where we don't like it when our nafs, our desires, are inclining towards things displeasing or disobedient to Allah, and we start to fight against it. You know, so, and I'm just giving, you know, just random examples. So for example, if a person inclines towards alcohol, for example, and so the nafs al-amara bisu at that base level is that, you know, if a person is operating at that level, then they may just give in to drinking alcohol, you know, and, you know, they just give into it. But if a person is working on their nafs and they come to the point of a nafs al-lawwama, the self-reproaching soul, then it's not to say that those desires are going to be removed, but it's going to say that when those desires come, a person doesn't like it, and they're working on themselves to keep themselves from acting upon it. So at the stage of a nafs al-lawwama, it's not to say that a person is always going to be successful in terms of preventing their nafs, meaning that they may fall into that particular sin or whatever it may be, but they don't feel right inside. You know, it doesn't sit right with them. Their heart is not content. And so that is the aspect of a person starting to gain control over their nafs, such that they're not content with committing ma'asi. They're not content with committing acts of disobedience. And then the final nafs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions in the Quran is in Surah Al-Fajr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about the nafs al-mutma'inna. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in Surah Al-Fajr, Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, oh, you tranquil soul, return to your Lord pleased and well pleased. And so this stage of the nafs, this is when a person has been able to conquer their nafs, and essentially they've aligned their nafs to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. And so now the person is able to be in a state of tranquility, because now they're not burdened down by their nafs. Their nafs is not leading them or trying to lead them to that which is displeasing or disobedient to Allah. So now their heart is able to find rest. And so that is like some of the things that we can mention in relation to the nafs. And so for many of us, the second level is, hopefully where we at least want to be, working our ways to try to get to that last level of the nafs al-mutma'inna, the tranquil soul. And soul is another way that they translate nafs as well. But essentially the nafs is you in a sense. In relation to my previous question about the dispensation of heart prayer, does Allah want to see us pushing through pain for His sake? I just recalled I had a teacher who prayed while having labor contractions. So there's a few things. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran that He does not wish difficulty upon us, but rather He wishes ease upon us. And so this is why He gives these dispensations. However, it's just like, we were just talking about the nafs, is that the nafs will incline towards that which is easy and that which is in many instances lazy. And so it's just that we don't want to just start taking every dispensation that we hear about, because that can lead to us becoming more or less corrupt. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't want for us to, overly exert ourselves. This is why, like, for example, even if you look at the aspect of fasting, fasting is an obligation, but there are so many different rukhsas, there's so many different dispensations for a person to not necessarily have to fast. Because again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not trying to make things, just overly burdensome upon us. I mean, there are maxims within the sacred law that talk about the aspect of hardship, is that generally speaking, hardship necessitates ease. Meaning that if a person is truly going through a hardship, then the sacred law is going to open up to facilitate ease for them. And so, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not looking necessarily for hardship upon us, but He is looking for us to have an aspect of taqwa, of consciousness of Him, so we're not just giving in to all of our whims and desires, or giving into laziness and these type of things. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. But for example, with your teacher, technically speaking, like the fuqaha, they have mentioned that, for example, up until the point that a woman actually is actively in labor, such that she's actually pushing out the baby, that the prayer is still due upon her. So yeah, it's not necessarily the easiest of things, but technically speaking, from a fiqh perspective, that's what it is. So that is probably why she was praying even while she was going through labor contractions. And the thing is that there are periods of time in between labor contractions when it could be feasible that a woman could do the basic aspects of the prayer even through labor contractions. What is Alif Lam Mim? This is mentioned in many surahs in the Holy Quran. So Alif Lam Mim, these are letters of the Arabic alphabet, the letter Alif, the letter Lam, the letter Mim. And at the end of the day, from the standpoint of their mentioning in the Quran, in terms of their meanings, what the scholars of tafsir, of Quranic explanation, mention about it is that only Allah truly knows what their meaning is. Yeah, my wife has prayed during labor in different capacities. So yes. So again, it's feasible Like, yeah, it can be done. I'm not saying it's easy. I can't even tell you what labor is like, period. But women have done it. And again, like I said, the fuqaha, they have mentioned that up until the point that a woman is actually actively delivering, is that the prayer is still a duty. So yeah, so that's so so that is a part of the aspect of it. But yeah, Alif Lam Mim, the scholars of tafsir, they mention that ultimately Allah knows best their meaning. Like some scholars have mentioned different possibilities, but there's no certainty in relation to if those possibilities are accurate or not. Some scholars have mentioned that Alif Lam Mim and other letters that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran, for example, Ha, Mim, Ain, Sin, Qaf, Sad, Noon, and others, that these also are representative of the challenge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed to mankind, that they are not capable of producing the likeness of the Quran. And so some scholars have said that, these letters in turn, like we said, Alif Lam Mim, Noon, Sad, Qaf, so on and so forth, that they're indications to the challenge that the human being, we're not even capable of producing letters in the likeness of the Quran, that we can't even produce the likeness of Alif Lam Mim. So these are just different things that some of the ulama have said about the letters that are presented in the Quran. But at the end of the day, the safest answer to the question is Allah knows best what they mean. Might have time for one more person, if anyone has anything that they want to share. Nothing yet. So inshallah, since we're basically at the end, inshallah, we intend that we will keep up our usual pattern. So the third Saturday of every month. So I don't know what that's going to be in October, but inshallah, we intend to keep up having our Living Islam sessions. And so we thank you all for joining us tonight. Apologize again for some of the technical difficulties that we've had. And inshallah, there was some benefit that was found. And any mistakes was only from the weakness within my own self. So please forgive me. Please ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me as well. And we got like one question that came in right at the end, and I don't know the answer to that. Sister Jamila, you might know that answer better than me. I'm sure that, well, the MECCA Center is a 501(c), so they are a nonprofit. And so I have, so I'm sure that if there are grants that they are capable of qualifying for, is that I'm sure they would utilize them, inshallah ta'ala. But that is not in my that is not within my scope of knowledge. I deal with the teaching side, not the administrative side. MashaAllah. But again, Jazakallah khair for being with us tonight, and we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will keep you in His divine care, and inshallah ta'ala, please keep us on your du'as, inshallah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam wa asbana wa ni'mal wakil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.